Welcome to Engage Your Tribe, a podcast about the art and science of audience engagement. I'm Jeremy Shear, and my guest is Andrew Smith, VP of Marketing at Power Reviews. Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's going to be fun.
Yes, indeed. Engage Your Tribe is brought to you by Tribal Knowledge Podcasting. We are a full service B2B podcasting agency, and we help brands use podcasting as a fun and efficient way to have authentic conversations with people you need to get to know to grow your business. You can learn more at tribknowledge.com. So, Andrew, tell us a little bit about your background in marketing and about Power Reviews.
Yeah, sure. I've been doing this for a while. I guess I started out as a journalist back in 2006. I was working in London at the time, and really kind of evolved into a content marketing roles at various places. I've been in SaaS now for around 10 years, and really just expanded my skills out from content marketing into kind of more kind of product, customer marketing. And so now I head up the marketing organization at Power Reviews. And Power Reviews, we're ratings and reviews, product ratings and reviews vendor for e-commerce organizations, I guess, or companies with an e-commerce offering. We've got some huge clients, some real whole household names, and we've got some smaller up and coming type brands because obviously e-commerce is where it's at and is growing very, very rapidly at the moment. So everyone wants kind of slice of that pie, and we support them by providing the ratings and reviews technology to support that. And obviously, ratings and reviews is a huge part of it in terms of they provide huge buyer confidence and validation ahead of any kind of purchase. So, our data and our consumer data shows that around 99%, I think it's 99.9% of people say they interact with review content when making a purchase online. So obviously, absolutely critical to that process.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for sharing that. By the way, I've interviewed a bunch of folks in this podcast who come from a journalism background and are now in marketing. And I have some journalism background too, interestingly. Do you find that having been a journalist was like good preparation in some ways for what you do now?
I really do. That's a really interesting question. I think really when I think about how I run a marketing organization here, and also just generally how the kind of B2B buying journey, I think content is so critical. Like having a really solid content engine in terms of velocity and quality is really important. So I think obviously journalism lends itself to that hugely. And yeah, I mean, in terms of the skills I developed, being curious, asking questions, obviously the copywriting, all that stuff is super important when it comes to kind of B2B marketing, which is now what I'm in, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I see that whole other topic we could definitely keep
Yeah, we
talking
could
about.
talk about that.
Well, we
That'd be
can,
fun.
I guess, but actually, we're going to talk about something else. So, um, specifically, marketing budgets. And all marketing leaders have to make decisions about how to allocate a budget, of course. So, what's your approach? Where do you start when you have to make, especially like tough decisions about where to put the money?
Yeah, it's a really good question, really timely for us. Our fiscal starts next month, so I've just literally been doing this, head down in spreadsheets, figuring out how I'm going to allocate everything. And I think there's a lot of different opinions about out there. And it's really not easy because you're typically dealing with a CFO and a CEO. In my case, I'm sure everyone in my position is as well, and they want to know exactly what they're going to get for any given investment. Now, us as marketers know that it's not quite that simple, right? Like if it was, this whole marketing thing would be easy and you wouldn't need specialists to do it. So anyway, I heard a lot of different opinions. Um, I've heard, some marketers baking in like 20% for like experimental stuff. Um, Now that's not really how I approach it. I think that makes sense. It's like almost saying we've got 20% that we can kind of write off on doing fun, cool stuff that could be really impactful or might not move the needle. I don't really work like that. I'm kind of fortunate in a way because I have the amount scrutinized, but I don't necessarily have the ROI against each line item scrutinized. So it's more like holistically, that's how I'm analyzed. So I figure like, sorry, I didn't tell her. Give me a second there. You can cut
Sure.
this, right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sorry, Susan, I didn't tell you about this. She's
She can join in if she wants.
you want to join in? All right, I know you have always. What? I can hear that.
Washing, did you say washing your underwear?
She's like, I'm washing your underwear, so yeah, don't mind me. So I don't really have much of a leg to stand on here and get out.
Right.
Anyway, where was I? So I was talking about yeah. So let me start about the bit where I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, no, I'm fortunate enough that I have the amount scrutinized, and obviously there's a certain ROI expected for that, but it's not like leadership, my business is going through every line item saying, what did you get for that exact investment, etc. So in terms of, when some marketers talk about being experimental and baking aside that, I don't really have to do that. I consider my whole budget to be like, I view my whole budget in um, that way. But, ultimately how am I splitting where I spend stuff? It's all comes back to the goals. So for us, I have literally a new business revenue figure that I'm going to be held accountable for next year. Um, and that's how I look at it. So ultimately, I have to get to that, and then it's up to me to figure out how to allocate the budget against certain tactics for that. So that's the new business revenue sourcing, but also we have an upsell and renewal that we're expected to impact as well. So that's how I look at it. And if I think about how much our business, how much we're expecting to source new versus upsell, I'll literally allocate the appropriate percentages. So I won't go into the details, but say, for example, you're expecting 50% from each. I'm going to allocate 50% against existing customers and 50% against prospect marketing for that perspective. So I don't want to give away my secrets in terms of where we're expecting our revenue to come from next year, but
Sure.
conceptually that's it. Same with territories, right? So if we're expecting 50% to come from EMEA or whatever, like I'm going to put 50% of my marketing budget against that. And that includes headcount. That includes what we actually spend in terms of ads and entertaining and whatever else we're going to spend our money on. So, I mean, that's how I think about it, very much mapped to overall business goals with the specifics kind of feeding into that, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, no, of course that makes sense. And so, I mean, I guess the natural next question is, and this would, I'm sure any marketer can relate, is how do you know if you've made good decisions? How do you
Yeah.
correlate the decisions you've made and all the stuff you guys do as marketers with revenue growth?
Right. So, I mean, ultimately, the main metric I'm looking at is always revenue that we have sourced. So, what that means is, and revenue and pipeline, I should say, because, for sure we can have an impact on whether a pipeline converts to revenue, but that's something we're entitled to ask questions about. If you see, for example, certain AEs delivering better on inbound leads versus others, then I think that as marketers, we should absolutely we are entitled to, and we should be asking questions around that because this is a team game and everyone's got to play their role. So yeah, I'm a big believer in that. So, but ultimately, it comes down to revenue, and then your inbound demo requests, how we do it. Well, that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to drive that action. So the demo request action, so an inbound inquiry, and to the extent to which that converts to pipeline, to which that converts to revenue. So, so ultimately, that's what I'm looking at. And so obviously, if you come down the chain there, you're kind of revenue, pipeline, demo request, and then you start looking at things that could lead to the demo request. So really, that's going to really depend on what the channel is, and all the rest of it. So, for example, with a social campaign, you got to measure it in the way that's in tune with the format and in tune with the target audience and in tune with the goal that you're trying to create. So, for us, social we're using much more as a kind of an awareness channel. So ultimately, it's like metrics that relate to that. So if it's a video, the extent to which that's been watched fully in terms of the running time, and then from there someone who's watched that video, whether they've ended up on the site and then leaving a demo. So, you can go basically you start at the top and come backwards from that is how I always look at this. Um, but leading metrics, I would say, is ultimately the answer in summary in terms of what we're looking for.
Yeah, right. A- And to what degree does like your success just generally, but also in terms of being able to say like, okay, that was a good budget decision, or we need to tweak that. To what degree does that depend on partnering with sales and having like open lines of dialogue and communication?
Yeah, so I would say we haven't been great at that, and that's something we're working on. Um, but I think ultimately, if you're if as we progress and get better, I mean that's what I'm always looking for our team to do, and for myself to do as well. And that's something we've got to get a lot better at, I would say. So yes, I would say that's a big thing. So lead quality is something I talked about before, and that's something I think that requires a real kind of open communication between sales and marketing, and also just honesty on both sides about what's a good lead. So,
Mhm.
like, don't get defensive. You say it around, okay, that looked like a good lead for me, but for sale, it didn't look a good lead. Okay, the truth is somewhere in the middle, or maybe it's over desperately to one side, but you've got to go in from both sides with an open minded, and that's what creates trust on both sides. And I think, if I think about my career, definitely marketing and sales has got more aligned. I think honestly, as marketing has had more of an influence on direct revenue, and sales has started to see us as a real asset in a way that they didn't maybe necessarily, 10 years ago when they probably saw us more as sales enablement. And now, so I think you have to earn the respect a little bit, but once you get there, it works both ways. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the better aligned you are, just generally, the better everyone benefits from that. Did an interview just the other day on this very topic. So,
Yeah.
sales marketing alignment, really interesting. And again, it seems like the kind of thing that every marketer and everyone in sales would probably agree in principle, like, yes, that is a
Yeah.
good thing.
Right.
And yet it's often a challenge and a
Yeah.
problem. I mean, in your guys' case, what do you think some of the barriers have been to not being as aligned as you'd like to be?
Yeah. I think it's possibly, again, I've got to be careful.
Sure.
You're walking me down a path here. I thought you were going to go, particularly on tape. But I think really it's coming at it with a shared sense of what is good or reality, if that makes sense. Like, if you're poles apart about, let's talk about the example of what's a good lead, for example, or what's a good meeting for you setting for us. Like, you know, the next step for us is to set like a very specific criteria. So, um, around account size, vertical, yada yada yada, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, like that's indisputable. Those things are not subjective; they're completely objective. So, I think that's where we need to get. And I think probably that's where we've had an issue before because we haven't really had that. So, you know, um, yeah, I, I, I would say that's it. And it's more like being willing to take egos out of it is how I would probably put it. Like you've both got to come at it with a kind of open-minded perspective around what's best for the business as opposed to defending your tribe to bring it back to your podcast title.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, no, that great answer. I mean, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. I was like, how am I going to answer this without like getting in trouble with my own company? Um, but yeah, I think every company probably can get better at this. And I think
Yeah.
honestly, it's a bit symbolic of how marketing and sales have evolved. And again, this is a marketing podcast, so I think I can say this without it being like, without getting in too much trouble. But I really do think the way B2B buyers buy now, marketing's a lot more valuable than it was. And, my vision as a marketer is to get to the point where buyers are so educated when they come to you that ultimately your salespeople are just order takers. So, and I think that's the best that would be a position where marketing would be like, okay. And then that's when we start like earning the big bucks,
Mhm.
But all the sales guys earning all the money. So, um, again, I'm a little outspoken sometimes about this stuff, and I think that stuff is important to just move discussions along and yeah, and progress how people think. But yeah, and that's ultimately my goal. But I think if you think about how we are now at this point where that's even a realistic potential target, um, with marketing sales come a long way, right? Like, and I
Mhm.
think there's going to be friction when that's the journey that the B2B buying cycle has gone on. And yeah, so I think you're going to cause friction, and there might be a little bit of ego and defensiveness in it along the way, but nothing you probably can't work through as long as you've got the right people in every role.
Yeah, right. I mean, we're all only human after all.
Right.
We all do have egos and sort of territorial, instincts and stuff
I'm
like
I'm
that.
just as bad as anyone else. I readily admit.
I mean,
So,
I totally get that, but I think you make a good point, and you said it earlier before. You know, content, what we call content, which is just short for all the stuff that
yeah,
every company now has to almost work like a media company, right?
right.
Producing all these channels, and in a digital world, that's how it's evolved. And I think you're right about it's hard to align maybe because things change so quickly. Things are not static.
Yes,
And if you think about
100%.
it visually, it's like it's a constantly moving target.
Right.
So it's not like you have to constantly be working at aligning these different functions in a company as things change. And it's not always going to be perfect. And it's just like this ongoing task that everyone has to work at.
Yeah, and I think I guess how I would sum it up, it really is just acknowledgement on all sides that you have to be open to change and evolution at all times. Like if you're just
Yeah.
gonna stand still and say, "This is how I think because I've always thought this way and I've got X amount of years of experience and whatever," I think you end up just looking out of touch and old fashioned, So, um, and
Yeah.
look at me in like 10, 15 years time, I'll probably be talking about all these things that I'm talking about now, and I'm probably gonna be, so might be as bad as anyone else, but I mean, I think that's important to ensuring that you do get better aligned for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay. So, well, this interesting. We kind of started with talking about budget and naturally morphed into a discussion about marketing sales alignment, but that's cool. I like how the conversation just took on a life of its own.
Yeah, I got
I
lots of
like that.
opinions about it. I got lots of opinions about everything. So ask me anything.
Well, Andrew, actually, I've kept you too long. I realize I had a
Okay.
few other questions, but I'm going to have you back on the podcast to
You
continue
can
the
ask me what
conversation.
you want. I don't mind.
That's okay. Well, I just want to thank you actually for a great conversation, for great insights. Like I said, the conversation kind of took on a life of its own, which is always a great sign to me that it's just flowing in a really kind of natural way. So thank you for that. And listeners, just so you know, we had a little trouble connecting at first, and Andrew you were a trooper, and you just stuck with it, and we
Yeah.
figured it out, and we got the job done. So thank you for that too.
Well, yeah, no problem. We're on Zoom, and I sometimes think the old ones are the best. Despite all I said about constantly moving, I guess
Right.
we did. We constantly moved and pivoted. So
That's
yeah,
right.
it's all
Hey,
good.
we could have used Skype if we really wanted to go old school.
Does that still exist? Don't know.
I have no idea. Let's not find out.
Yeah. Fine.
Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.